Welcome back, everyone. Today we want to talk about something that lies at the center of being a doctor, but yet feels like a quite abstract concept. Every day we are collecting information, linking the clues, and finally trying to conclude the most likely diagnosis so we can choose the appropriate treatment. This little detective work is what we call clinical reasoning. It is probably one of the most important skills for a healthcare professional, but how do you learn this skill? Is it just about learning medical knowledge and then applying it, or is there more to it? To get some ideas about the science behind clinical reasoning, we are joined by Ligia Cayres Ribeiro. Ligia is assistant professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. She is head of a research group on clinical reasoning and technology-enhanced learning. Originally trained as internal medicine specialist in Brazil, she moved towards a career centered on education and research, starting in the very south of the Netherlands in Maastricht, where she followed a master course in health professions education, afterwards obtaining a PhD in Rotterdam, and finally ended up in the very north of the Netherlands in Groningen. Her research focuses on clinical reasoning and student-centered education. Welcome, Ligia, and thank you a lot for joining us here on the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Before we start talking about clinical reasoning, I was interested, after coming from Brazil to the Netherlands, what was your most memorable culture shock when you came here?
Well, the most remarkable cultural difference, I would say, not necessarily a shock because it was not totally unexpected, was the way we interact socially. So, as you can see, the listeners cannot, but you can see that I talk not only with my mouth, but I also talk with my hands. So in a natural conversation, I engage all my body into it. And even when I am talking with someone I just met, so a stranger, it is totally natural to me to have some body contact. So, for example, touching the forearm with my hand or touching the shoulder. And in the end of a conversation that went well, that I really enjoyed, to hug goodbye. Mm-hmm. So this was quite challenging to me when I, in the Netherlands, and also not only in the Netherlands, but it's in the northern parts of Europe, because there is these kind of interactions may be perceived very differently from what the natural interaction that we perceive coming from Latin America and coming from Brazil. So that was a bit challenging to me to adjust to it. And of course, I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable in my presence. And I still have a memory of people who were faces that expressing, I don't know, shock or even fear when my body moved towards them to give a warm hug. So that was, I think, the most challenging adjustment that I had to do, being in the Netherlands and especially living in it. And it's not that I'm not myself anymore, but I had to find a way to be myself and also to guarantee that whoever is engaging with me feels comfortable. At least I try to. I do my best to.
So they say the Dutch people are very direct, but not so direct in physical contact.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah. The language is also a very important cultural difference, because in Brazil we tend to, be much more indirect in our conversation. Yeah, but the physical part was more challenging to me.
Yeah, interesting. Never thought about that actively, but I can see what you mean by people coming from here in this area having more distance with physical contact.
And I take the opportunity to apologize to any of my colleagues who felt it.
I think if people know you, it's pretty fine, but maybe it's a bit surprising in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Hey, you are head of a research group on clinical reasoning. How do you even study such a concept?
Yeah, that's a very abstract concept, as you mentioned, because it is a sort of a thinking process, right? And concepts like thinking, learning, knowledge are all abstractions. We cannot see it. We cannot put it into a machine or into a microscope and see how it looks like. So we only can imagine what it is. And when we try to study it, when we research thinking processes, all we can do is to collect some information that provides us some clues. We need some kind of proxies that are visible, that are observable, that allows us to make inferences about the thinking process. So when it comes to clinical reasoning, most of the knowledge that we have collected about it comes from observing medical doctors, medical trainees interacting with patients and collecting clues from it. Also interviewing these individuals after an interaction with in a simulation consultation, for example, and asking questions. So how did you feel about this patient at this moment? What were you thinking when you asked this or that question? And so by doing it many times, repeatedly, with people from different levels of training and in different contexts, we get to have a hint or to have observable information that provided us clues on what and on how clinical reasoning happens.
Maybe a stupid question, but in medical research, all is about blinded research and control groups. And in the moment you step into an observational study where the subjects you study know that they get studied, doesn't that influence how they act? So to make it more concrete, my question is basically, if I, as a medical doctor, know I'm observed by someone who researches clinical reasoning, don't I behave differently than in the everyday practice where I know I can just do whatever I do and hopefully get to the right thing and be less conscious about the thing?
I think it's high likely that you will perform differently whenever you've been observed, even in your own clinic. If you have, I don't know, someone shadowing you or a senior colleague who's, I don't know, checking your competencies,
yeah.
you will probably adjust your performance to the context of the current situation. And it's the same when you are engaging with research. So this is something that cannot be, I think, excluded from the process, but can be adjusted and can be acknowledged when we do our inferences. But one interesting thing that happens when we engage, for example, in simulated consultations, that many of us have experienced and subjects of research also report, is that after a while, it becomes quite, the engagement with the problem and with the patient kind of distracts from the context of being observed. I don't know if you have experienced this as a medical student in a KTC during your simulation consultations, for example, but that usually comes to a point that we don't feel like we are doing a simulation or that we've been observed. And so this is something that happens. But as I mentioned, I think there are adjustments that cannot be disregarded. But we compensate for that by making very many different observations and repeating it in different contexts with different individuals. And if we observe patterns that repeat throughout the process, then we can make a statement about it, a reasonable assumption about the common elements that have repeated itself. And if we were to, I am myself mostly engaged with quantitative research, so more closely to what you have described, research that follows paradigms that are similar to clinical research, drug research. But the research method has to adjust to our research question, right?
Of course, yeah.
And when it comes to processes like thinking and reasoning, we have to it's wise to choose the most appropriate research paradigm or research method or research design. And in this case, I would say it would be observation studies, indeed.
Yeah, I definitely can relate in some way when I think back of simulations that we did earlier, that at some point you forget that there's a camera looking at you. And in the simulation scenarios where you have like also besides of conversation observations, we also have simulations of like a patient, a mannequin lying in bed, and you have just vital parameters on the screen. And also at some point, if it's a good scenario, you forget that it's not a real patient and you just behave like you would. So yeah, very interesting. I think you can compensate by many, many repeated observations. It's basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think both ways, right? Those who volunteered to this research, we have a very good proxy, I think, as what it would be in real scenarios, and also the repetition is the component that allows us to make inferences about overall thinking. Otherwise, it would be the thinking of an individual, of a group of individuals performing in a specific hospital, for example, and not something that we can reliably say that represents the thinking process of overall medical doctors or healthcare professionals in a broader sense.
Yeah, interesting. Very different approach to study medical relevant stuff when you compare it to classical medical research, right?
Yeah. Although I have to say that it's not straightforward to think of this kind of research in reasoning process, research in learning, research on how to best offer medical education, for example, to students with medical practice. But this is what we aspire to, right? So when we research clinical reasoning, we aspire to safer patient care. Yeah. When we study medical education and we try to figure out the best strategies, the best moments, the best sequencing of activities, the best curriculum environment, how to improve it, we also aspire to safer patient care. So clinical research and medical education research, they share a common goal, although, of course, it's more straightforward to think that a new drug that can treat a disease better than old drugs, it's a more straightforward thinking that it will positively impact patient care. But the research we do in the context of education also contributes, well, we aspire it to contribute to better patient care.
I do not think it's that far away. If you say like, a new drug might help the patient, also a better trained doctor, it's pretty obvious that they might help a patient in a better way than a less well-trained doctor, so to say. Yeah. So it's pretty important to research how should we educate future doctors in the best possible way, right?
Well, that's what I believe, but I don't know. Yeah, for some of us or many of us, I think it is straightforward, but I also think, and I've seen that for many of us, it's not. So I think one of the responsibilities that we have as researchers in the field is also to make this connection more explicit and to increase awareness on its relevance.
Yeah. Maybe it's best to increase the awareness by getting into the clinical reasoning stuff, because I think this is what every doctor agrees on, what we are doing every day. And when I hear about clinical reasoning, I think of many lectures and workshops we had on this, and I also think about all the patients on the ICU that I'm treating that I need to think about. But I also think of Dr. House. I'm a big House MD fan, and I think many would consider him and his team as geniuses in clinical reasoning. Would you agree?
Well, we're old school, Timo, because Dr. House is something from, I think, my generation. Not yours, right? It's been on the air for 20 years ago, I think. maybe. Well, anyway.
I might be older than you think.
Okay, it could be. But I have a complex relationship, I would say, with Dr. House. It triggers different feelings, admiration for in some aspects, but also, I feel like the team or perhaps individuals portray an artificial, I would say, representation of the real practice, the real daily practice of patient care. And as a medical student and as a junior medical doctor, I aspire to be as smart as him and as accurate as him. But he was also, in my opinion, a very bad role model when it comes to...
Oh, absolutely, yes.
It's been a while since I watched the series, but I remember him as probably the antithesis, the opposite of what I was aspiring to be when it comes to communicating and collaborating with colleagues, and especially when it comes to, not especially, but also communicating with patients and families. And I think it triggered these, perhaps it did not start with it. The series, I think, reflects, it's always a bit of a reflection of the medical culture, right?
Yeah.
And I think we had back then, and I'm not sure to what extent it has changed at the moment, but we had this perception that you can either be the smart guy who has the right answers all the time, which we can talk about if it's realistic or not, or to be the nice guy who communicates well, who is empathetic, who respects the team and values each other's skills, and is performs in a more collaborative, indeed collaborates with your peers and is respectful to family and patients and their moments. To the point that I had a junior, when I was already a supervisor in internal medicine, this is something I will never forget, a junior trainee, a resident who was working under my supervision. We were having a conversation about I don't know what, but I remember he saying that he didn't want to be the nice guy. He wanted to be the smart guy. As if we had to choose.
Both is not possible, right?
And as if one thing did not affect the other. Because when we are genuinely interested in the patient well-being, when we are genuinely listening to the patient, to the family, to the colleagues, we are more, we have higher chances to collect the key cues for us to reason about the situation and to make smart and good decisions. So it's not only that we can develop both skills or competencies, whatever we wanna name it, but we should, because one thing influences the other. And that's why I have this difficult relationship with House. And also because, as I remember, there was always an answer in the end, right? Or most of times.
Yeah, I think so.
No matter how complex the problem, it's like, as you mentioned, it's kind of a detective. I think maybe this is the appeal of this series as well.
Probably.
Because it's like kind of a detective thing. And in the most of detective series, there is always a closure in the end. We know who did it. And in real life, it's so different. In internal medicine, for example, as in pediatrics and family medicine, and we have to deal with uncertainty all the time. And many times we have to be able to manage a situation for which we don't have an answer. We do not have whodunit, and we have to provide good care regardless. So yeah, I think it's something nice to aspire to be an accurate, a good diagnostician, and to perform well when it comes to diagnostic reasoning, because this is, as you mentioned, at the core of our profession. We should never, ever neglect the role it plays in patient safety. But but I think it's possible to be a good diagnostician and yet be a different professional, I would say.
A decent human being.
to begin with.
No, I think the point of the case where you have no answer in the end especially highlights the necessity of being socially intelligent to then, okay, if we not can give a name to your disease, then we can at least find your question and your way of dealing with this uncertainty, and therefore you need some social intelligence to talk to a patient and the family to understand what they want from a situation and how to ideally deal with this in this particular case, right?
Yes, and also to be able to be a good diagnostician, we need the good cues.
Yeah.
We need to be able to collect the information that is relevant. And when we establish a trust relationship with the patient, it facilitates the process. It facilitates, I don't know. I am as a patient a very anxious person. Mm-hmm. I have white coat hypertension. So I get nervous when I am visiting a doctor, which is interesting and a bit embarrassing, but it is what it is. So being a doctor myself, but anyway, so the way my cognition and emotions are very interconnected. So when I am in front of a doctor, I'm feeling emotion, and the way that I can portray my history, to share what I'm experiencing, it relates to cognition and emotions. So if I'm feeling comfortable in front of a doctor because, I feel like I'm welcome, I feel like he's not in a rush and I have my time, and I feel like he or she is really interested in getting to know what's going on with me and help me. It facilitates this process of remembering, because sometimes it's very easy. You have experienced something for a couple of days and you have everything fresh in your memory. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's about digging into years ago and to bring these memories back and as accurately as possible. We know that memories are messy, but as accurately as possible, we need to feel comfortable. I mean, it's easier to do it when you are feeling comfortable, and especially if it's something distressful. If I'm scared that it could be something serious that could hinder my well-being, that could affect my life from that moment on. So this engagement and the building this trust relationship with the patient, it's not about being nice, but by itself, of course, I think we should all of us should aspire to being decent human beings. But it's part of the job, mm-hmm. and it's also interconnected with the ability to diagnose.
Yeah,
we depend a lot on the right cues to be good diagnosticians, and some of these cues will not emerge easily, and this trustworthy relationship we build with the patients will help. And I don't remember, but I think I remember in the house team, there were the guys who had these skills, right? Who were more skilled in communicating.
Yeah.
And then it's also good to see that they played an important role in the outcome, because they were able to do something that the house was not able to.
That's why they worked as a team, right? Outsourcing the emotional part to different doctors, and then the thinking part to the smart...
Yeah, but I think this is something that, as I mentioned, it did not create it. I think it comes from the medical culture.
Yeah.
And but I think it's a misrepresentation of it's fun. I loved watching it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think all the listeners know that it's not realistic in many other ways. Yeah. When you look at the show, there are no nurses whatsoever, and they, as their team, do every little task by themselves. So it's unrealistic in a bunch of ways. But I was wondering then, the clinical reasoning part is what you're saying basically. Should we then learn the emotional or social decent communication strategies first, or how do we learn this process of having a good conversation and also getting the right clues and then having all the knowledge of linking them together? How do we learn this?
Well, this is complex, right? And if we think about when we have we conceptualize clinical reasoning, it's not even just about diagnostic reasoning, but what comes after, and how we manage the problem, and what kind of resources are available to manage the problem. What is the best way for this patient in this specific moment and circumstance? So it's indeed a very complex ability to develop. And because in education we need to be pragmatic, sometimes the only way to go available for us in a specific context is to kind of break this big ability into smaller ones so that they are teachable and learnable. Otherwise, it would be really hard to create to guide the student throughout the process. So that's why we have a curriculum with different activities that focus more in one aspect or the other, or focus solely in one aspect over others. What would be desirable, I would say, is to have an awareness in every moment in which we are focusing in one aspect or the other, to have an awareness of why we are doing this and how it fits the bigger purpose of developing this larger expertise of clinical reasoning. And also connecting the dots, as you mentioned, when we are reasoning about a patient, we connect the dots of information. But as students and as educators, I think it's also desirable that we connect the dots of the curriculum and have moments in which we can integrate these abilities so that we not only experience it in a more ecologic way, so closer to how it would be applied in real life, but that we see the meaning, why each piece is meaningful, and we genuinely engage with these activities, knowing that they will support us in the future. But for example, when it comes to diagnosing a patient, it would be perhaps very overwhelming to a novice medical student to have to perform all these things simultaneously, especially if it's a complex clinical situation. But if it's a simple situation, less complex situation, without many extra elements, it's also possible. Yeah, it's feasible to expose students and to these kind of experiences, controlling for the elements that make a clinical case complex. So if you have already studied, for example, the basic sciences knowledge to allow you to understand what anemia is, and to have some information already about how to diagnose the most common types of anemia, and it is possible to engage you in a conversation, in a clinical consultation with a patient with anemia. Perhaps it's not wise to add too many elements to it, for example, emotional elements, healthcare systems complexities, because this will probably overwhelm you. This we could add in the future, but it's possible to create these scenarios and these moments for you, even as a first-year medical student, to engage with a job more or less like it feels like in the practice, even if you have additional activities that will focus on one aspect or the other. I think these moments would be very desirable for you to have a taste on it, right?
Yeah. When should we start throwing in these moments? Do we have to have a broad medical knowledge beforehand, or is it after I learn anemia in second year of bachelor, I don't know, directly connected with like a consultation moment, or what would be ideal moments to do this?
Well, there is a kind of consensus, if it's something that is ever achievable in medical education, that we should start as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And we should start explicitly supporting students develop clinical reasoning skills from the beginning. It doesn't mean necessarily engaging with real patients, but thinking about educational strategies that are theory-informed, that are evidence-informed, that can help you connect the dots. Because the connect of dots, that you mentioned very early in this conversation, is very important. We know that this diagnostic expertise is not just about the amount of knowledge that you have. So as a second-year bachelor student that has just studied everything about anemia, if asked, you will probably be able to provide a big amount of information about it, right?
Yeah.
About the physiology of producing blood, and also about the pathophysiology on what can go wrong, the details of the process, what are the consequences of the process, and even a bit of information on how the patient would experience it.
Yeah.
But diagnosing a patient with anemia, because the patient will not reach out to you with anemia, right? They will reach out to you with a symptom. It could be shortness of breath, for example. Yeah. It's something else. And what allows one to be able to consider anemia in the context of a patient with shortness of breath is not only the knowledge, but how knowledge is organized. So these connections, the way the knowledge is shaped in our memories changes with clinical experience, to the point that we can easily retrieve from our long-term memory the patterns that we have observed before in that patient. So this new patient triggers the memories of previous patients that you have assisted with shortness of breath, and this allows you to come up with intuitive diagnostic hypothesis with which you will work and check if they fit the case or not. So we know, or we have a good amount of evidence showing that this reshaping of knowledge is triggered by clinical care, by the experience with patients. And as I mentioned, if we control the complexity of the case, we take care for it not to be too overwhelming for students, we can contextualize from the beginning. And we do it to a large extent, I think, already. When we think about problem-based learning, for example, in which a conversation or an educational activity starts with a patient, with a symptom, we are, to a certain extent, already supporting students make this connection. Even if the focus is to learn bone marrow function, for example, we already help establish initial connections between the problems in bone marrow and and how patients experience it. So we can do it in different ways, but I think we don't do it, and we are doing it already, but we do not do it very explicitly, I would say. Sometimes it's not that clear to educators or to students that why we are doing that activity and what is the purpose of this activity and how it connects with the future of the student as a doctor. And I think we can do a better job in making what we do more explicitly connected to clinical practice. But I also think we should aspire to providing clinical experiences from the beginning. It can be with real patients whenever possible. We know that it's difficult, and it's becoming more and more difficult with time. So the opportunities for patient care are not that, we don't have that many opportunities to offer, so they're quite limited and constrained. We have simulation consultations, and this is something that the schools can be maybe afford to provide to a larger extent, because it doesn't depend much with interaction with the healthcare system, and it's more under the school's control, so to speak. And with technology, we also have the virtual patients that can, if well designed, they can provide an interesting experience and an interesting interaction with, of course, with a simulated virtual patient. But that is all of these experiences are experiences with patients, and we have the tools, and I think we can use them to a larger extent. And it's not just my thinking, but there are a lot of people advocating for this from the start, because we know it's important, and also because it's motivating, right? And many of us as educators are struggling with the lack of motivation, and I think we as educators and schools are most of responsibility relies on us. If students are not motivated, I think it's because we are not making explicit to them or offering the activities that would motivate them.
Yeah. It's interesting that you cycled back to this thing of transparency about why are we studying like this, because this is one point I wanted to come back at as well. Because I remember from my student times, we had in the bachelor like patient lectures where a patient was in a big lecture room, and this was like the key of problem-based learning. We were able to ask the patient the questions, and I think the faculty tried to provide us the information why we are doing this. But for me, although I had the goal of becoming a good doctor, it was always like a bit, okay, yeah, I have to be here. It's kind of mandatory, but it doesn't yield a lot because this is not tested at the exam. And like we talked to Fred Hefferty about the thing that students are always most motivated about the stuff that matter for them at that particular moment. And the far goal of becoming a good doctor who is a good diagnostician, that's too abstract, that's too far away, right? So how do we make it explicit, and maybe how do we make students more motivated by also shifting the assessment more to testing the whole process of applying knowledge and not just putting the knowledge on paper?
I totally understand what you say, and of course it resonates to me also looking back into my experience as a student and as a trainee, and how assessment plays a relevant role in our tracks, because of course we need to progress, right?
Yeah.
And this is something most of us cannot afford to, that are serious consequences when we fail to progress. Personally, financially, even outside of familial consequences. So, and yeah, I would say it's a pity that our educational systems have come to the point that assessment plays such a big role in a motivation process. I'm not here saying that assessments are not relevant, that moments in which we make decisions on how one or other student should progress, or even ourselves should progress in our careers, are very, very relevant. But it's we've been trained our whole lives, right? I think when by the time we enter basic school, we already entered this system in which we have to pass to progress.
Yeah.
And we bring this culture to medical school. And I'm not talking about one specific medical school. I'm talking about schools all over the world. We kind of share, many of us share this similar path. And assessment is very complex also because, as you mentioned, how do we assess clinical reasoning?
Yeah.
Right? We talked here, it's so broad, there are so many elements needed for one to to perform well, to develop expertise in clinical reasoning? How do we assess it? And again, as educators, what we usually do is we break this big thing into small chunks of skills, of knowledge, and we test this a sample of these small chunks to make inferences. Timo is good enough or not in reasoning about A. Ligia is good or enough or not in reasoning about B. And it's always an imperfect process, but I think maybe we went too far in breaking the skills into such a small pieces that the small pieces in the end do not represent as expected the whole of the skill. So I think we should consider alternative assessment procedures, and there is a lot going on in research in medical education about, for example, programmatic assessment, in which you have, instead of high-stakes assessments, you have smaller moments of formative assessment throughout your training, but also about, when it comes to clinical reasoning, that are novel tools that can provide a more comprehensive understanding on the capabilities of a trainee to reason about specific problems. So in one way, I think we should reconsider assessment and the assessment practices, and even perhaps reframe assessment and its role in the curriculum. But I think it's not should not mainly about it, right? I bet that when you entered medical school, you were eager to engage with patients. You were eager to help people.
Absolutely,
you were eager
yes.
to connect with people. And what we usually say, again, it's not about one. It's a worldwide. We say Timo and his colleagues. Just wait. Trust me. Study what you have in your plate right now. In the future, it's going to be important, but just wait. The time will come for you to engage. So it's frustrating.
It's also the same as everyone learned during mathematics classes in high school whatsoever. Like, this will become important later, and then it doesn't. And then you go to med school and you get the same. Like, this will become very relevant to you in the future. But you are in that situation that you feel like, but I need to get to that future. And to get there, I need to jump through this loops of assessments, and I need to pass the test. So I don't care about now. I mostly care about the things that are relevant to get through the system, and then later on I can see what I need to learn to actually do the job well.
Yes, yeah. And I think we can aspire to do better. I think we have the resources now, and we can also advocate for having more resources so that we can take advantage of the enthusiasm that students bring and fulfill their expectations to the best of our capabilities, considering our constraints, so that I believe that having a taste of it and understanding the joy of this interaction, and the joy of being able to think about plausible diagnostic hypotheses, being able to solve the problems, or even if you don't have the hypothesis on how to help that person to feel better. I think that would be a very powerful motivator.
Absolutely.
Of course, if you have a limited amount of time and you have to choose between, I don't know, engaging with a material in a way that feels more authentic to you when it comes to patient care and passing the exams, you have a very difficult choice in front of you. So that's why I think these two aspects of training we should take very good care of it.
Yeah.
To open space in the training for this kind of interaction. And I believe that it would be a very good motivator for most students. And I think we can aspire to that. I don't think this is something crazy, right? And it's not abstract or unachievable. It's challenging, but it's something we can aspire to.
I agree, and I also agree with the point that it will facilitate of keeping up the enthusiasm that we probably all had when we entered med school, and not destroying that by too much assessment on stuff that seems irrelevant. That if you have some classes on applying the knowledge and feeling like, oh, I'm doing a little doctor's work now, this feels nice, this is what I'm doing it for, it might help that students stay motivated even more. But I think it is some changes that need to be done in the world of medical school, and I think it is possible. I agree with you. But to maybe get a bit of round off, I want to ask you if you have also, after having many advisors for faculty and the med schools, if you also have some tips for the student that might be listening on how to deal with the system as it is right now to learn clinical reasoning in an ideal way.
Well, that's a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's. I think we can always. I trust students. You are all very smart people, and you are. I trust your abilities and skills to reflect on the processes, and also to look for strategies that can support you. And I truly believe that you do this already to a large extent. Again, considering the constraints under which you are you are experiencing medical training, but maybe I think there are different ways, right? In an individual level, when you are doing some self-study about bone marrow, for example, maybe looking for ways to connect the dots yourself. So now I'm studying this, but why am I studying this? Why is this important for me as a doctor in the future? So maybe even in textbooks currently, they offer a few clinical vignettes to contextualize the problem. There are many different sources of this kind of information that you can look for in a way to you can reach out to more experienced trainees or colleagues and have a chat and have them help you also make sense on the relevance of that information. I think this is something we can do. You can chat with your colleagues, your peers. And so this is something more individual, right? Like you do for yourself. But you can also advocate for change in medical education in a more political perspective. So being part of the conversation on the curriculum and chatting with people who are representing you in committees, or even being part of committees and bringing this subject to talk about it, bring this subject to light, right? And also, I think most of teachers, I truly believe, most of teachers are willing to help you as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you are struggling in making sense of that topic on how it will help you as a doctor, having a chat with the teacher and asking for guidance or clarification, I think most of times this encounter will have a good outcome. And the teacher can even reflect on, it might not be just Timo. Maybe
exactly.
Ligia and the rest of the class are struggling the same way. So perhaps in the next encounter, I will do this conversation that was a private conversation and bring it to the larger audience of students so that everybody so that I can share these tips or guidance with everyone. So I think there is a lot we can do individually and collectively with our peers and teachers, and also in a larger, in a broader sense. And I think all the paths are relevant.
Yeah, I agree. Nice advices. To come to an end, I was wondering if you have anything exciting to share that you are working on at the moment or in the near future. Some research we can wait for.
Well, I hope I am, because this is my job, right? Well, I am very enthusiastic, I would say. I think equally enthusiastic and a bit scared on how technology will change not only education, but clinical reasoning and the diagnostic process and the job of a doctor in the future. But I would say I'm more enthusiastic than scared about it. And at the moment, as a researcher, I've been exploring how to leverage technology in a way to advance education. So, for example, how can we design activities mediated by technology that support very novice first-year medical students to connect the dots? So to make sense of the relevance of the information in their future practice, but also connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
Connecting basic sciences with clinical sciences. So this is one project that is being led by one of the PhD students in our research group, and it has started already. We had a first round of a chatbot that aims to do that. And we are looking into the data and see what went well, what went not as expected, so that we can think the future. And you mentioned assessment and how challenging it is to assess clinical reasoning. There are also students, master and PhD students, developing novel strategies to look into clinical reasoning, so that we can move beyond multiple choice questions. I'm not getting into the subject. I think they have their relevance, right? But they have their limitations. And also move beyond diagnostic accuracy, because traditionally the way to check clinical reasoning skills, diagnostic skills, is through diagnostic accuracy. So I present to trainees, to students, clinical cases, and I measure to what extent they were able to get to the correct diagnosis in the end, which is a good proxy. If you are able to get to the right, 50 cases of myocardial infarction and you got it right, most of them, I can assume that you have developed expertise, at least in that level of complexity. But if you don't, and this is the most important diagnosis, right? As an educator, if you don't, why? What is it that you are? What is lacking? Is it that you don't have knowledge, sufficient knowledge? Is it that the knowledge is very sparse in your mind and you cannot connect it? Is it that you are unable to apply the knowledge to a clinical situation? So they are focusing on novel strategies that can help us have a further understanding, more comprehensive understanding on the ability beyond diagnostic accuracy. And they are doing a great job. And I think in the end we will have relevant contributions to the field.
It sounds very relevant research and also pretty interesting, and also all the hot topic of technology. We also had a different podcast here on the show with someone who does research on the patient cases. So I'm very curious what comes in the future, and maybe a good thing to come back together and talk about the technology advances, the clinical reasoning aspect of it. Maybe also the assessing is a topic I feel like you can have hours and hours of conversations about. So I'm pretty excited.
Well, I would love to.
You're more than welcome to join us again. But I think for now we got a nice overview about all the different aspects you need to think about when you shout the word of clinical reasoning, and also some nice advices for and faculty and students. So thank you very much for this very interesting talk.
Well, thank you, Timo. I had a nice time. It was a joy talking with you and even thinking about the problem further. It's you triggered also interesting reflections to me. For example, how can students, what kind of advices can we give students so that they can to help them navigate the processes?
Awesome. So if there are any students who have any interaction, please feel free to share them with us, and we can forward them to Ligia and have some conversation about that in the future.
Yeah, I would be happy to interact by email, for example, or in any way that you have that you've been able to connect with your audience.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
Bye.